Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today's video is a follow-up to yesterday's video. This is the grand finale for spoilers for Magic the Gathering's Universes Beyond Assassin's Creed set. We did a video yesterday going over half of the cards, maybe even a little bit more than half the cards, and today's video is the other half of the set. We're going to finish up going over all of the rest of the cards. If you want to see that first video, I am going to link it in the comments below and in the description so you guys can check that out so that you're up to snuff on all of the cards that have been spoiled over the last couple days. And we're going to dive right in and go over all of these cards as quickly as we can here. But first, if you haven't already, please like the video. It helps me out a ton. It's you guys liking every video that's helping this channel to grow so quickly. And every single like honestly helps a ton in getting this video out to even more people. The algorithm just feeds on that, so it would mean a lot to me if you guys would like the video. So please do that. Also subscribe if you're new, because there's tons of more, tons of new content coming, tons more content coming. I got some surprises in store that I'm not allowed to talk about just yet. But Bloomborough spoiler season is right around the corner, and we're going to hit the ground running with that set. Really excited about that one. Standard rotation is coming, so it's going to be a big deal. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. With all that out of the way, let's just jump right into the cards here. This first one is Arod Dorian, a 3/3 legendary human assassin with Death Touch for 4 mana in the colors of Rakdos. And he's basically an assassin lord. He gives all other assassins you control +2/+0. And he also disguises for 2 mana, 1 red and 1 black. So you can just play him as a 2/2 ward 2 face down for 3 colorless. At any point that you want, you can just pay that disguise cost, flip him up, use the Death Touch as a combat trick, also use the buff that you're giving to other assassins as a combat trick. So nice little bit of extra value there with the disguise, but really the value in this guy mostly is the fact that it's a lord for assassins, and not only is it a lord, but it's going to buff up their power twice, which in some ways is better than +1/+1, especially with creatures like assassins and their ability to get in easier with a lot of their keywords. So pretty cool card here. Next up, we've got Palazo Archers. 1 green and 2 for a 2/3 human archer with reach. Whenever a creature with flying attacks you or a planeswalker you control, Palazo Archers deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So it doesn't have to just swing at you, it can swing at your planeswalker, and either way you're just gonna nuke it for a couple damage. Now if you make the archers bigger, you can do even more damage and kind of get to a point where they can't even swing in with a flyer without it just dying, which is kind of cool. It's worth noting that it's every single creature with flying that attacks either you or a planeswalker you control that's gonna get nuked for the power of this card. So put some buff on it and just sit back, and the flyers just can't do anything, which is kind of cool. It's even more interesting in a group game because it's very political and forces your opponents to attack each other with their flyers instead of you. Just a really interesting card. Next up, we've got Assassin Initiate. 1 black mana for a 1/1 human assassin. Has the ability to pay 1 colorless, and Assassin Initiate gains your choice of flying, Death Touch, or lifelink until end of turn. So kind of cool. You can actually use this ability more than once, so you can give him all of the abilities you want if you have the mana to do it. So if they swing in with a big flyer at you, you could pay 2, give it flying and Death Touch, block, and trade with their big threat, which is kind of interesting. This is another one of those cards that just like I mentioned in yesterday's video, I kind of feel like it's made for limited, but with this only being a 100 card set, I don't even know if limited is actually a thing for it. If you guys know if this is supposed to be a limited set or not, let me know in the comments. I'm assuming it isn't, but then when I see cards like this, I really think that it might be. So really curious about that. Next up, we've got Arbar-Mir, a 2 mana 2/2 legendary human assassin in the colors of Boros. Whenever Arbar-Mir or another non-token historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, Arbar-Mir deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain a life. So you jam this guy on the field early, and then all of your historic permanents entering the battlefield are just gonna drain 1, drain 1, drain 1, which is kind of sick. I don't know if this wants to go in Legendary Tribal or some kind of a Saga deck. I feel like the way to get the most value off the pings is probably going wide with artifacts, since they can be so cheap. Just play a bunch of artifacts, get a bunch of drains. Seems pretty interesting. But it's cool that it can kind of swerve and sort of build into any of those directions, so I like it. But next up we've got Tax Collector, 1 white and 1 for a 2/2 human advisor. When he enters the battlefield, you get to choose one. You either tax, and until your next turn, spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, or you arrest. Detain target creature an opponent controls, which means until your next turn, that creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. This is really cool. It reminds me a lot of Thalia, and in some ways I think it might be better than Thalia. I mean, it doesn't have the first strike, and it doesn't have the automatic, you know, taxing of non-creature spells, but you can just choose tax if you jam this early on turn 2 every turn to make their stuff cost more, and it's gonna apply that cost to creatures as well, which Thalia doesn't do. And then as soon as they get something very problematic on the battlefield that you need to get rid of or prevent from attacking or blocking, then you can just switch to arrest. Like, you lose the attack ability, but then you get to just lock down a creature, and you get to, oh, it only happens once. Ignore everything that I just said. I thought that it was at the beginning of your turn you got to choose one of those. You only get to choose it when it enters the battlefield. So you only do this ability once. I guess that makes sense because it's an uncommon. It would be way too good as an uncommon if it just did it every turn and you got to pick one every turn, right? Still a really, really fun card. Could you imagine, though? Could you imagine if it was every turn? Okay, this isn't nearly as powerful as I thought. And again, this is another example of something that the power level is really only in a spot to be utilized in some sort of limited event. So I really hope there's limited in this set. Next up, we've got Hidden Footblade, 1 red for an artifact equipment with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you attach it to target creature you control, and that creature gains first strike until end of turn. And then equipped creature also gets +1/+0 and haste, and it equips for 2. So it's a really cool way to have like a combat trick where for 1 mana you're just giving something +1 attack and first strike until end of turn. We've seen combat tricks that do that a lot, but the fact that it's on an equipment that can still get you value later on in the game is what makes this kind of cool. You can start re-equipping it to other creatures to give them the +1/+0 and haste whenever you need to, whenever it makes sense. And that's kind of cool. It makes this sort of ability, this sort of combat trick ability, way, way better because it adds value that you get to keep for the rest of the game. Next up, we've got Spartan Veteran, 1 red mana for a 1/1 human soldier. As long as it's your turn, Spartan Veteran has first strike. You can also pay 2 colorless mana to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So again, nice little limited card here. It's going to swing as a 1/1 first striker. You're going to have that threat of activation. And what's cool about a threat of activation like that is you don't really have to use it to make it valuable. If they have a bunch of 2/2s and you're swinging in with this and you have the mana open, they're not going to block because they're not going to want to get blown out by you going up to 2 power and with your first striker. So they're just going to let it through. And you don't have to actually use the mana to pump it. You can then in your second main just use your mana to play whatever you would have been playing that turn anyway. So threat of activation makes it a little bit better than it seems on the surface. But at the end of the day, still just a limited card. Next up, we've got Reconnaissance, 1 white mana for an enchantment. You can pay 0 to remove target attacking creature you control from combat and untap it. This is kind of wild. It's almost like a Maze of Ith. You can't use it on your opponents, but you can use it on yourself multiple times. And what this means is you can just swing with everything every turn, and then just wait until they declare blockers to decide what to take and remove from combat. So nothing's ever gonna get eaten up in combat. Nothing's ever gonna die in combat unless you decide you want to trade with their creature, and so you don't remove it from combat. So I think this thing is subtly really good when you start to think about the ways it can be used in a deck that's going really wide and how you can just swing with everything. If you have 6 attackers and they've only got 4 blockers, you swing with everything and then just remove the 4 that they block and untap them, and they're ready to block on your opponent's attack, and the 2 that went unblocked got through. So a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this card as long as you build around it correctly. I think it's super fun. This is one of those uncommons that I don't necessarily think is just for limited. I think you could build this into a pretty fun deck. But next up, we've got Head Splitter. This is 1 red and 1 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace, and then attach Head Splitter to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+0, and it equips for 2. So it's a lot like the Germ cards that we got in Modern Horizons 3, where they generate a 0/0 Germ and then attach. But it's an assassin, which makes it just a little bit better. For 2 mana, you get a 2/1 Menace Assassin, but then you also get this equipment that is value left behind if that creature dies, so you can re-equip it. And also, it's another flickerable target as well, so every time you flicker this, if you have a way to flicker this repeatedly, you're going to get another 1/1 Menace dude, which is pretty cool. But next up, we've got Settlement Blacksmith. 1 white and 2 for a 3/3 human artificer, and when Settlement Blacksmith enters the battlefield, if you control an equipment, you draw a card. So definitely made for equipment tribal, probably too slow for constructed. So once again, another card that I think is probably meant for limited. The more cards we see like that, the more I think this set has to be limited viable, right? This has to be something that they're planning on people drafting. I'm almost answering my own question because there's so many cards that seem only viable and limited that it kind of has to be, right? But we're going to move on. This is Keen-Eyed Raven. 1 white and 2 for a 2/2 bird with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. So, nice little bit of value on your 2/2 flyer for 3. A little bit of upside. Definitely another card that's meant for limited for sure. But being able to put a +1/+1 counter on a different creature that's, you know, better than the Raven, that can get more value off that counter, whether it be maybe a menace creature or something like that, maybe a first strike creature, seems pretty cool. Next up, we've got Labyrinth Adversary, 1 red and 3 for a 4/3 Minotaur with Trample. And whenever you attack, you may pay 1 red and 1, and when you do, target creature can't block this turn. Nice little piece of value. Honestly, really good pick for limited. A 4/3 Trampler for 4 is already pretty on rate for what you want to be playing in a limited environment, but having that extra ability to be able to shut down their best blocker kind of just puts this a little bit over the edge and makes this very desirable and limited for sure. Again, too slow for any kind of constructed deck, but a very cool card. Next up, we have Brotherhood Ambushers. 1 black and 4 for a 6/3 human assassin. Yowza. It is 5 mana though, unless you use the free running ability, which means that if you deal combat damage to a player this turn with an assassin or a commander, you get to pay 1 black and 3 instead. And if you get that cost reduction and get a 6/3 for 4 mana, that's pretty darn good, especially in limited. So pretty good in the right deck. You're going to need to go wide with assassins in limited to make the most of it, and I think it's probably just not good enough for commander, so the commander part of the free running probably doesn't matter. But in a go wide assassin deck in limited, this could be pretty decent top end filler. Next up, we have Misthios Fury. 1 red and 1 for an instant. It deals 3 damage to target creature, and if you control an equipment, it also deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. So nice limited removal here that gets a little bit of extra value in the Equipment Matters deck. Helps close out the game a little earlier by hitting them for damage. And it's cool that it's instant speed. No matter what, it's 3 damage at instant speed for 2 mana, which is still going to be pretty decent removal. You can kind of use it as a combat trick because of the instant speed, so pretty cool card. Next up, we've got Bureau Headmaster. 2 mana in the colors of Boros for a 2/2 human assassin. Equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and equip abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate. Now, man, I really want to build an equipment deck in some sort of constructed format, and they always seem to give us at least a little bit of value for something like that in pretty much every set that they put out, but it just keeps not being good enough. So I don't necessarily think this is viable and constructed, although I wish it was. But in Limited, if you're going into an archetype that uses equipment, this will be really, really good. This will be a very high pick if you're sure that you want to go down that road and that you're going to be really deep into equipment. This is just going to get you a ton of value over the course of the game. But you kind of have to be deep into the equipment to really get that value. That being said, even if you're just running a few pieces of equipment and you have a lot of assassin payoffs, since it is an assassin, it could still be worth running this card, but it's not going to be like a first pick or anything like that. Next up, we've got Battlefield Improvisation. 1 white and 1 for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If that creature is attacking, you may attach any number of equipment you control to it. So nice little bit of value here for the equipment deck. Again, even more cards they seem to be pumping out for equipment as an archetype in Limited. But a cool little instant speed combat trick that's going to get you extra value in that equipment deck. Next up, we have Detained by Legionnaires. 1 white and 1 for an aura. It enchants a creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. So functional reprint of pacifism. Decent removal in Limited. Shuts down their guy. Let's move on. Next up, we have Brotherhood Spy. 1 blue and 1 for a 1/3 human assassin. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control a legendary assassin, Brotherhood Spy gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. So all you have to do is have any legendary assassin on the battlefield, and for as long as you get to keep that, if they don't deal with it, if they don't get it off the battlefield and kill it, every turn this is going to swing for 2 damage unblockable, or maybe more if you buffed it up with all that equipment we've been talking about the last several cards. And that's kind of cool. So I think in the right deck, in Limited, this is going to be really, really fun. A really easy way to get through and close out games if you have the right deck and you have enough legendary assassin support. So pretty fun. Next up, we've got Andrestia. This is a 3-mana vehicle. It's a 4/3 with Island Walk. It's legendary. It crews for just 1, and whenever it attacks, if an assassin crewed it this turn, you draw a card, and then it becomes an assassin in addition to its other types until end of turn. This card is super, super fun. Definitely only useful in Limited. I don't know, maybe as a sideboard card though when constructed, right? If you're playing against like mono blue or something, probably not. But I love that you can just swing in with your 4/3, crewing with literally anything you want, but if it's any kind of assassin whatsoever, you get to just draw a card and then also turn it into an assassin. So all of those assassin payoffs we've been seeing that only trigger if you hit with an assassin or buff up an assassin or whatever the case may be, you can get all of those payoffs on Andrestia here while drawing a card if you just crew it with literally any assassin, which should be pretty easy to do with this set. So honestly, when you consider all of that, the Island Walk is sort of just gravy, and I think this card is very valuable at only 3 mana, so I think this is a really, really good uncommon, especially because it's colorless. You can run it in pretty much any deck that's going wide with assassins, and most of the decks in this Limited format should be going wide with assassins, so I actually think this card is really good. But next up, we have Tranquilize. 1 blue and 1 for a sorcery. Tap target creature an opponent controls and put 3 stun counters on it. Limited removal, shut down any creature you want for 3-4 turns. It is sorcery speed, so you can't get a little bit of extra value out of it by waiting to use it on their turn or anything like that, but still just a solid piece of filler removal if you need it in Limited. Next up, we have Merciless Harleyquin. 1 black and 2 for a 2/1 human assassin. It has free running 1 black and 1, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 3 life. 1 life. Why did I say 3 life? Because I was looking at the 3 mana cost. You lose 1 life when you draw the card. I think this is pretty good. I think this is pretty good because there's a lot of value in it that's overlooked. Even if you're just playing a 3 mana 2/1 that draws you a card, that's kind of okay. It's not great, but it's kind of okay. It replaces itself. But it's also an assassin, and that's the part that I think is most overlooked. There's just so much assassin payoff in this set that's almost as good as having another keyword on it, I feel. So having a 2/1 that draws you a card that's also going to get every single assassin payoff that you could possibly have in your deck is pretty good to begin with. And then you add to that the fact that it can be played for just 2 mana if you hit in with an assassin or commander with the free running ability, and at that point it's just insanely good. 2 mana for a 2/1 that draws you a card and gets all of your assassin payoffs is nuts. So it's even good at 3, but it's really good at 2. I just think this is one of the better commons we've seen. Probably not good enough still to see constructed play, but definitely a high pick common for limited, 100%. Next up, we've got Fatal Push. This is a reprint. Yes, I know that it's a reprint. 1 black mana for an instant. Destroy a creature if its mana value is 2 or less, and it has Revolt, so you destroy it if it has 4 or less instead, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. Solid removal, probably the most widely used removal in some of the older formats, so good to see that come back. Next up, we have Assassin Den. 1 blue and 3 for a 2/4 wall with Defender. Walls are making a comeback. 1 blue and 3 to activate an ability that puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it can't be blocked this turn, but activate only as a sorcery. If you are just in a deck that's able to shore up its defenses and just muddy up the game board and not let your opponent get through and kill you, this is going to be super good, because not only does it come down and help you do that with the 2/4 body, but it just lets you stall out the game, and then when you're good and ready, you can start paying mana to get through with your best attacker every turn, unblocked, and it gets bigger every time you do it. Perfect win condition in a turtling defensive deck. Very cool that that sort of an archetype is going to be supported. Should be really fun to honestly lean into that in Limited. I think that'll be a fun archetype. Next up, we have Hookblade Veteran. 1 blue mana for a 1/2 human assassin. As long as it's your turn, Hookblade Veteran has flying. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. It can block a 1/1s all day for your 1 mana, and it can swing in for 1 with flying, which is gonna matter a little bit more because it's an assassin. So the fact that it's got some evasion as just a 1-drop and can trigger those assassin things that trigger when you actually hit for combat damage makes this card a little bit better than it otherwise seems. I still don't think it's like a super high pick in Limited or anything like that, but it is definitely better than people are going to think it is at first, because it's going to take a little bit for people to realize just how valuable a lot of the assassin payoffs are, and how much a card like this goes up in value because it's easy for it to trigger those. Next up, we've got Poison Blade Mentor. 1 black and 1 for a 2/1 human assassin with Death Touch. Already pretty decent for a 2-drop. And whenever it attacks, another target assassin you control gains Death Touch until end of turn. So, pretty good here. They're not going to want to block this because they're going to lose their blocker no matter what. But if they don't, you get to keep giving something else Death Touch and swinging in with your best creature, and it's just going to be difficult for them to deal with. So they almost kind of have to block this guy and trade with him at some point, but even when they do, you're going to get at least 1 activation, get in with a much better creature with Death Touch, and again, going to get all the assassin payoffs because it's an assassin, so pretty cool card. Next up, we have Terminate. This is another reprint. 2 mana in the colors of Rakdos, instant speed, destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. This thing's a staple. This is a classic card. When it came out, it was probably the best removal that had ever been printed at that time. Just a very cool, clean card. Just 2 mana, instant speed, get rid of whatever you need to. Like seeing this come back, and I like the art. Next up, we have Hired Blade, a 3/2 human assassin with flash for 1 black and 2. Not great. Although the flash is going to matter a little bit more with that assassin creature type because of some of the assassin interactions and payoffs. Sometimes you can get a little bit more value out of surprising them with a creature. But that being said, this is still kind of filler. You're probably going to pick it up and jam it if you're lacking a 22nd, 23rd card in your Limited deck. Still should be pretty fun though. Next up, the Aesir Escape Valhalla. This is a saga for 1 green and 2. On chapter 1, you exile a permanent card from your graveyard, and you gain life equal to its mana value. On Chapter 2, you put a number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control equal to the mana value of the exiled card. And then on Chapter 3, return the Aether Escape Valhalla and the exiled card to their owner's hand. So, you get to just keep recasting this. Chapter 1, you gain a bunch of life. Chapter 2, you get a bunch of +1/+1 counters. Chapter 3, you get the big thing you exiled back. You also get the Saga back, and you can play them both, and then you can do it all over again. This is going to be great in any deck that can drag out the game where you actually have enough time to get the repeated value off of this and play it multiple times in a game. So it's not going to be great in a very aggressive deck. Maybe in that wall defender stall type deck we were talking about a few cards ago. This could be really, really good in that. It's also just really good with bomby things that are going to let you put a lot of +1/+1 counters on something. So really interesting ways you can use this card for sure. I kind of love it, honestly. But next up, we've got Escape Detection. 2 blue and 1 for an instant. Return target creature to its owner's hand and draw a card. It's kind of like a repulse. A little bit more deep into blue, but kind of like a repulse. But it also has free running. Return a blue creature you control to its owner's hand. So this gets even crazier. You can play this card for free at instant speed by bouncing one of your own blue creatures. That seems awesome. If you pair this with creatures like Mana War or other creatures that have ETB effects, it's just insane value. You get to bounce their creature, draw a card for free, and then return something that you get to get an ETB trigger on. Or you could return something at instant speed that they're trying to kill with removal. Say, oh no, instant speed escape detection, bounce the thing you're targeting, also get rid of your bomb and draw a card. Like, that's really strong. And if the thing you're saving also has an ETB, this card just has so much potential to provide an insane amount of value at the ceiling if you use it just right, and I kind of love it, to be honest. But even the floor is really good. Like, it draws a card to replace itself, it deals with a problematic permanent, or returns something of your own to your hand. You could return 2 of your creatures to your hand, right? You could return a blue creature to your hand to return another creature of yours to your hand and draw a card, knowing that you're about to play a Wrath effect and wipe the board. Just a lot of different cool ways you can use this card. Probably one of my favorites that I've seen. Definitely one of my favorites in common or uncommon. This is just a really, really fun card and really rewards clever play. But next up, we've got Go for the Throat. Another reprint, 1 black and 1 for an instant. Destroy target non-artifact creature. It's Go for the Throat. Next up, we've got Ballad of the Black Flag. Another saga for 2 blue and 1. On Chapter 1, 2, and 3, you mill 3 cards and may put a historic card from among them into your hand. So in a way, it kind of draws you 3 cards while also gassing up your graveyard for 3 mana. So if you need to gas up your graveyard in any way, and you're playing enough historic cards where you're going to always draw something, this is just insanely good value. And then on Chapter 4, historic spells you cast this turn cost 2 less to cast. So you get your value, get your value, get your value, and then you have this big turn where all the things you've been drawing into, now you're just jamming them on the field at a reduced cost. Honestly, super, super cool card. It requires a lot of building around. It requires either going deep into artifacts or legendaries or sagas or all 3 to really make it effective. It also wants you to, build into an archetype that values having things in the graveyard. So having a deck that kind of balances all of those aspects is going to be tricky to build, but really, really rewarding if you can pull it off. So, really interesting card. Next up, we've got Path to Exile. Man, we just keep seeing tons of reprinted removal, huh? This is 1 white mana for an instant. Exile a creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This card's amazing. Sure, it ramps them, but it's 1 mana instant speed exile anything. This is not new. Everyone knows this is one of the premier pieces of removal in the entire game. You can also use it on yourself to ramp if you really, really need to, which is kind of cool. Next up, we've got Aveline de Grand Prix. I think I pronounced that right. Correct me in the comments if not. 2 green and 2 for a 3/3 legendary human assassin with Death Touch. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on that creature. It also disguises for 2 mana in the colors of Golgari, which is interesting because it's a mono green creature, but it has a Golgari disguise cost. Does that mean that it can't be played in a mono green commander deck? I'm pretty sure if you play it as your commander, then your commander deck is a Golgari deck. I'm pretty sure that's correct, but what about the other way around? I think maybe you can't put this in a mono green commander deck. Let me know in the comments, because I'm super curious, but either way, a 4 mana 3/3 Death Toucher is okay, but the fact that you can get a bunch of +1/+1 counters off of every creature with Death Touch that hits is kind of nuts. If you're just in like Death Touch Tribal, where all of your creatures have Death Touch, each one of them can trigger this and put a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters on itself, which is kind of crazy. So this is something you can just slam later in the game after you have a board full of Death Touchers and immediately swing and get a bunch of value off of it. Your opponent's going to have to trade for Death Touchers real fast, or they're just going to get really big and out of control really quick. So, really fun card. Next up, we have another saga. This is Fall of the First Civilization. 1 white and 2 for an enchantment saga. On Chapter 1, you and target opponent each draw 2 cards. Nice symmetrical draw. She older than anybody. Chapter 2, exile target artifact and opponent controls. And then on Chapter 3, each player chooses 3 non-land permanents they control. Destroy all other non-land permanents. What an interesting and strange card. So it's a 3 mana delayed pseudo sweeper. Each player just keeps their best 3 non-land permanents and gets rid of everything else. So the card's going to be really, really, really good against go-wide decks. At the same time, if you're up against a go-wide deck, drawing them into 2 more cards, they're probably running out of gas super early, and that helps them gas up. Then again, they're going to be really tempted to not play those because they're probably going to die. Really, really interesting card, honestly. It's going to take... I think it's going to take playing this card to really feel out its strengths and weaknesses appropriately. The fact that Chapter 2 only exiles an artifact and kind of whiffs if you have nothing to target almost makes it kind of null and void to a certain extent. I mean, in some games, it'll hit big time, you know, get rid of the One Ring or whatever, but sometimes it's going to whiff, so I think you really need to evaluate it just based off Chapter 1 and Chapter 3, which is just really bizarre. Chapter 1's symmetrical, so there's no real advantage there, and then Chapter 3 is just like a mini sweeper. I don't know, card's weird. Let me know in the comments how you would use it, how you think it's meant to be used, or if there are any ways to break this card, or that I'm overlooking, ways that it's meant to be used that maybe I'm not seeing, but definitely an interesting card that I just feel like needs to be tried out before you really get a sense of how well it works. Next up, we have Hemlock Vial. 1 black and 1 for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose a life, so it replaces itself immediately. You can also pay 1 black and tap it and sack it. Each equipped creature and equipment you control gains Death Touch until end of turn. How interesting that the equipments gain Death Touch as well. That means if you're playing equipment creatures that are equipments and creatures, the reconfigure creatures we saw a number of sets ago, those will get Death Touch even without being equipped, and I think that's primarily the way that's meant to work, and why it's worded like that, which is interesting, because you don't have to waste your time trying to equip even more creatures. You know, you can let your equipment creatures just be there and get the Death Touch, along with all of your other equipped creatures. It's very interesting. It definitely wants to go into Equipment Tribal, but maybe also Death Touch Tribal. I don't know. Either way, the fact that it draws you a card and replaces itself when you play it makes it at least considerable. But you definitely want to be in just the right deck to use this. Otherwise, it's not worth running. Next up, we've got Towering Viewpoint. A 2 mana 0/4 artifact creature wall with Defender and Reach. So even more Defender Tribal here. It has Leap of Faith. You can pay 3 mana and target creature gains flying until end of turn. So another good defender that can come down early, install aggro, and then give you, you know, this sort of win condition later on in the game when you have enough mana to throw around. Which is kind of similar to a lot of the walls that we've seen in this set. So yeah, just slots perfectly into that deck and just even more reinforces the idea that that archetype is supposed to be a thing, and that's what you're supposed to do, is, you know, gum up the board, stall the opponent, get to a point where you have a bunch of mana, and start using all these different ways to give your creatures evasion and just slowly get through with them while all of your big walls and big defenders hold the fort. So, very, very cool. Next up, we've got Mortify, even more reprinted removal. This is 3 mana in the colors of Orzhov. For instant speed removal, destroys target creature or enchantment. So I loved this card when it first came out. I believe it was Apocalypse. It was definitely that block. I don't remember if it was actually the Apocalypse set. If you remember which set this was first printed in, definitely let me know in the comments. But very, very clutch piece of removal. I use it in a lot of my commander decks. The ability to just be able to kill an enchantment in a pinch, and either way it's at instant speed, is really nice, so cool to see this come back. Next up we have Brotherhood Regalia. 2 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has Ward 2, is an assassin in addition to its other types, and can't be blocked. So this just makes the equipped creature unblockable, which is kind of wild. It equips to a legendary creature for just 1 mana, or to any creature for 3 mana. So if you're wide enough in like a legendary tribal deck, this could be really, really cool, where you're constantly just giving your best legendary unblockable and some Ward 2 protection for just 1 mana. And if they do end up killing it, they have to spend an extra 2 mana to kill it, which means you're out-tempoing them, and then you just spend the 1 mana to re-equip it to your next best thing. So you're constantly kind of out-tempoing them and forcing them to waste a lot more mana than you are, while you're in a position to swing in with an unblockable thing every single turn. So there's this inevitability to this card that I really, really like, and I think just the elegance of how it will work when you're actually in the games using it is going to be really, really interesting and really good and really overlooked, I think. So I think this card's probably a little better than most people will give it credit for until they finally experience it smashing their face in. But next up we have Excalibur, Sword of Eden. That's right, we finally have an Excalibur card in Magic the Gathering. And it only took the Assassin's Creed set to do it. 12 mana for a legendary artifact equipment, which is a lot, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of historic permanents you control. So you don't even have to go wide with 12 historic permanents. You just need 12 mana's worth of historic permanents on the battlefield, and this thing is just free. And what does it do if you just play it out for free? It can equip to a legendary creature for 2 mana and give them plus 10 power and vigilance. This is just a game ender. Give your best creature plus 10 power and vigilance. It's swinging in, it's blocking anything it wants to and killing it, most likely. And it only costs 2 mana to equip. The big downside here is it does have to equip to a legendary creature, but you've got different ways to take advantage of that. First of all, this set is chock full of legendaries, and most of the cards are meant to be used in a legendary tribal deck anyway, and this slots perfectly into that. Also, you could use it in older constructed formats with Tempted by the Ring, which is going to turn things into legendary creatures, and then once it is, it can equip the Excalibur. So you can kind of use that mechanic, Tempted by the Ring, to allow you to equip Excalibur to things you might not normally be able to equip it to, and that versatility is kind of cool. Overall, just a really fun card. It might be a little too slow to matter. You might just be winning the game by the time you have enough legendary permanents out on the battlefield to play this for 0 mana, but I'm not sure. We'll have to see how games go with it, but there's definitely a lot of potential for this to just come down for nothing and just completely swing a game, so I think it's a really cool card. Next up, we've got Phantom Blade, 1 black and 4 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you attach it to up to 1 target creature you control, and then you destroy up to 1 other target creature. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has Menace. So, pretty cool. It's a very expensive card, but the fact that it destroys any creature on ETB makes it a lot better than it seems. It's almost like a Ravenous Chupacabra for 1 extra mana, except it can't be killed like the Ravenous Chupacabra can. So you jam it down, you kill whatever you want, it's flickerable, and if you flicker it and it comes back, it'll kill something else. And even if you're not doing that, you kill the thing, and then your best creature has +1/+1 and Menace, and if that dies, you can move it for equip 2. So just kind of a lot of value here. It is insanely slow though. I don't think this is meant for constructed, but in limited, I think this is a really fine option as one of your top end of your curve removal slots, and as one of your removal cards, the extra value that it gives you is really, really good. And if there is some way to flicker things in limited, which I'm not 100% sure there is, but if there is, this is going to go way up in value. Just a really cool card. I say that about a lot of cards, don't I? Really cool. Really cool. Next up is Propaganda. This card is really cool. It's 1 blue and 2 for an enchantment. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. I've always loved this card. This is another reprint. This was released during the heyday of when I was doing a lot of standard with physical cards. I forget exactly what sets were new at the time, what set this came in. I want to say it was somewhere around the Urza's Saga era. The Urza's Saga era. It might have been slightly before that or slightly after that, but I think it was somewhere in there. If you remember what set this premiered in, let me know in the comments, because I'm just kind of curious. But very fun card. Love to see it come back. Yes, it is a reprint. Next up, we've got Assassin's Trophy. Speaking of reprints, 2 mana instant. Speaking of reprints that are removal, which is just seems to be everywhere in this set. 2 mana in the colors of Golgari for an instant speed piece of removal. Destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So it seems like most of the removal in this set is reprints, and it's reprints of some of the best removal from Magic's history. Not all of the best removal, but some of the best and most popular removal from Magic's history, which is kind of interesting. I am bummed that they wasted a rare slot on a reprint, but it's a cool card. I like the art. Glad to see it back. Next up, we've got Shi Jun. This is a 3/3 legendary human assassin for 3 mana in the colors of Izzet. It has Leap Strike, so as long as it's your turn, it has flying and first strike, which is nice. Flying and first strike on a 3/3 for 3 lets you get in with your assassin and trigger all of your crazy assassin shenanigans that you need to get in to trigger. So that's pretty good. It also has Rope Dart. You can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to deal 1 damage to each opponent. So this might work really well with some of the historic synergies, because you could play a whole bunch of artifacts and have that synergize with your cards that care about historic cards, and also have that synergize with Shi Jun here. I'm not exactly sure how a deck like that would look, but it's a cool concept, and I think it's definitely worth exploring. But I like her. She's fun. She's fun, she's flavorful, she's Izzet, which we haven't seen a lot of in this set, outside of, I think there was that one vehicle that was really cool. Yeah, I like this. I'm pretty sure this is also the assassin that's going to be in the new game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, that's coming out soon. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but she seems interesting. Next up, we have another reprint, Reconstruct History, but it's not removal. This is 4 mana in the colors of Boros for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target artifact, enchantment, instant, sorcery, planeswalker, and planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. So, ton of value here if your deck is very spread, if it's very versatile, if it's using a somewhat equal amount of artifacts, enchantments, instants, sorceries, and planeswalkers. You can get a ton of value by getting 5 things back from your graveyard. You do have to exile the card no matter what. So it's really interesting to think of what kind of deck is going to take most advantage of a card like this and get the most value out of it. But yeah, does this see play already? I'm not sure. It is a reprint. Let me know in the comments. But we're moving on. Next up, we've got Smoke Bomb. 3 mana for an artifact with flash. Gives all your creatures Shroud, which means they can't be the target of spells or abilities. Not just that your opponents control, just period. So you can't target your own creatures either, which is really, really important to note. But that's really powerful. 3 mana flash, give everything Shroud. You can do it in response to removal to basically fizzle their removal spell, which is awesome. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice Smoke Bomb, but when you do, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So you get Shroud maybe on your turn and also on their turn, and then on your next turn, you lose the Shroud, but you get to give your best thing unblockability. Honestly, pretty good for an uncommon. You definitely want to save it to use in response to removal to make them waste a card. That's where you're going to get the value out of this. And you do have to hold up mana to make that work. So some decks aren't going to like this as much as others. Decks that want to just slam everything onto the battlefield every single turn and put as much aggro on the opponent as possible might not like something like this. But a lot of the times this card's going to be welcome. Really, really cool piece of protection here. Can make them waste a piece of removal. Just a fun card. Next up, we've got Yggdrasil, Rebirth Engine. 3 mana for a legendary artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile all creature cards from your graveyard. You can then tap this and exile the top 3 cards of your library, but the main draw to the card is you pay 4 and tap it to put a creature card exiled with Yggdrasil onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Now, most of the time, these abilities that bring something back onto the battlefield with haste make you sacrifice the creature at end of turn. This does not, which is awesome. It means you're bringing back something every single turn for 4 mana, getting haste, so you're able to swing in with it immediately or use its abilities immediately, and then you just get something else the next turn, and you can keep getting value with the thing that you brought back. You don't have to sacrifice it. So it is really good. That being said, it is also really expensive. You have to invest a total of 7 mana into this thing before you see any value at all. And in the process of doing that, you also have to exile all the creature cards from your graveyard. So if you have other ways of interacting with your graveyard, you remove your ability to do that. And it gets a little scary. You could play this, exile everything, and then they could destroy this, and now you just shot yourself in the foot. Everything's exiled forever, and you have no way to access it. That being said, I mean, reusable recursion that has strictly beneficial effects on the creature you're recurring is pretty good, and having this extra ability to exile the top 3 cards of your library if you do run out of gas makes it even that much better. It means you can always make sure you can find a target to eventually hit with this, and that it's not a complete waste of card advantage no matter what. So it's really interesting. But like I said, it is super expensive. 7 mana before you get anything out of it, and that has me cautious about brewing around this card. But if you have any crazy ideas about how to use it, definitely let me know in the comments. Next up, we've got Javi the Allfather. This is a 6/6 legendary god warrior for 6 mana in the colors of Naya. Javi the Allfather has indestructible as long as there are 4 or more historic cards in your graveyard. So you just need a bunch of legendaries or artifacts or whatever in your yard, just in there, and it just has indestructible, which could be pretty good, but it's also 6 mana, which is expensive. But Javi also has Sage Project. Whenever Javi or another legendary creature you control dies, you return target legendary creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So it just keeps bringing back things as things die. And as long as you have enough things in the yard, it's got indestructible so that it's harder to remove, so that it can just keep bringing back things. It can be a value engine in the right deck. And I'm super interested to see how people would brew around this, because I feel like there's some really crazy potential just waiting to be tapped with this card. But I'm not 100% sure how to get there. If you have ideas, let me know in the comments. But we're going to move on. Next up, we have Monastery Raid. 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. If this spell's free running cost was paid, exile the top X cards of your library instead, and you may play the exiled cards until the end of your next turn. Very, very cool. So you just play this for 3, exile 2 cards to play, use it as kind of overcosted temporary card draw, or you can use its free running ability to play it for much cheaper, or to just play it for much more but get way more value out of it. I like that the free running ability is versatile. If you manage to hit in with an assassin or a commander, you could pay 1 red and 1, right, and just exile 1 card, but you only had to spend 2 mana. So it's not necessarily getting you more value than hard casting it, but it's getting you a card to play with spending less mana, which is just sort of another twist to how to use it. But obviously it's going to be a lot better to just have a whole bunch of mana you can dump into X, exile a whole bunch of stuff. You get to play them until the end of your next turn, so you do have some breathing room to untap and play all of the stuff that you exiled, which makes the card a lot better than it otherwise would be. But that free running cost is just really interesting. I still think it's probably meant for limited, but there's potential here for sure. Next up, we have What Must Be Done. One of the crazier Wrath of God variants I've seen in a while. 2 white and 3 for a sorcery, and it's kind of a charm. You get to choose one. You either let the world burn and destroy all creatures and artifacts, not just creatures, which is some nice gravy, or you release Juno, return any historic permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it enters with 2+1/+1 counters on it if it's a creature. Really, really cool. So it's a Wrath, but it's more than a Wrath because it hits artifacts. And it's recursion, but it's more than just your normal recursion because it can hit artifacts or it can hit sagas, in addition to being able to hit a legendary creature or whatnot. Or a legendary anything, really, right? So the versatility here is nuts, and if you're in the right deck that wants access to both of these abilities, it's just even crazier. It's just turned up to 11, right? If you're in like a Reanimator deck that's going to use this for release Juno, but also just be a backup sweeper if you're in a pinch, that's just crazy. And I think that's probably where this card is most likely to land and be the best in, which is interesting. It's almost like a White Invoke and a mini Farewell, because it hits more than just creatures. It doesn't exile, so maybe Farewell is the wrong comparison, but definitely the ability to choose that charm aspect to it is something that is worth a lot. Giving that versatility is worth way more than you would think. Normally means that a spell is going to be overcosted for what it does. I don't necessarily think this is overcosted though, because even if you use it as a Wrath, you know, typically 4 mana is the norm to Wrath creatures, but you're also hitting artifacts. So for 1 more mana, you're hitting artifacts. So maybe it's like a half a mana overcosted, but not by much. So it's almost like the versatility, that charm versatility, it's almost free in a way. It's like a half a mana. And I just think that makes this card even better. But next up, we've got Loyal Inventor. 1 blue and 2 for a 2/3 human artificer with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, and then shuffle. Put that card into your hand if you control an assassin. Otherwise, you put it on top of your library. So, pretty cool card here. Getting to fetch any artifact into your hand if you control an assassin is pretty good, but the fact that it comes stapled onto a body is what makes it particularly good. The biggest problem with most tutors is you can't really afford to take a turn off to tutor up a thing you need and not impact the board. So the fact that you also get some board presence here, you get something to stave off aggro a little bit, or just to keep putting pressure on your opponent to not fall behind tempo-wise, while fetching what you need, is really, really cool. Sure, you have a hoop to jump through, you need to have an assassin, but there's also other upside gravy that you can get out of this card, like if you have ways to flicker it. I know I use that example a lot, but you could just keep tutoring up artifacts if you can just keep flickering the Inventor, which is another interesting way to use it. So I think this card is really interesting. One of those cards I would absolutely want to mess around with in Limited, if Limited is viable for this set, which after seeing all the cards we did, I have to assume it is at this point, because most of these cards don't make any sense if they can't be played in Limited. But anyway, I kind of love this. Moving on, we've got Alexus Deimos of Cosmos. That's a lot of oses. 1 red and 3 for a 4/4 legendary human berserker with trample, which is not bad to start, especially for an uncommon. Just a 4/4 trampler for 4. But also, it attacks each combat if able, it can't be sacrificed, and it can't attack its owner. So it's almost got built-in counter abilities to threaten effects. It can't be threatened. Like if they steal it, they can't swing with it, and then they can't sack it to anything. So it's just anti-threaten, which is really, really fun in my opinion. And at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Alexus, untaps it, and puts a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. Honestly, it seems like a downside at first, but that's just crazy, especially in Commander. It means every single person at the table is going to take turns swinging with this, and none of them can swing at you with it. And it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, so by the time it's back to you to swing with it, it's just a much bigger creature. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually just starts killing players, right? Unless it dies, but it can't be sacrificed. So a really fun brew might be to find a way to make this thing indestructible, make sure it survives combat, and just force everyone to keep swinging with it and see what happens. But even if you're able to just kind of ramp and slam this early enough where there aren't any creatures on the board big enough to block it and kill it in combat, it can maybe just start to take over the game and start to accumulate counters so fast that it's going to outpace any other creatures your opponents play after that. So it's not really ever in a position to be blocked and killed, and that might be a fun way to run it. Definitely a super fun card for Commander. Be really interesting to see how this works in one-on-one and if it's worth it, but even just, you know, anti-threaten effect, they gain control of it, give it a counter, can't swing at you with it, can't sacrifice it, and then just have to give it back. Seems like it would even be good in one-on-one, but this is one of those cards that I'm just like itching to try because it just seems so fun to see how things play out with it. Next up, we've got Desynchronization. 2 blue and 2 for an instant. Return each non-land permanent that's not historic to its owner's hand. Historic cards are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. So really, really good in the historic deck. You just get to keep everything on the battlefield and bounce all of your opponent's stuff. It's also really cool if you're clever in how you build your deck and you have some not historic permanents, but your only non-historic permanents are things that have ETB effects. So that when you play this, you get to keep all of your important historic stuff that wants to stay on the battlefield, but also get to return some value to your hand that are things that are going to generate ETB triggers and get you extra value when you replay them. Be really, really fun to build around this card in that way. And it's also a pretty decently costed piece of removal here, a pseudo sweeper, if you will, considering the fact that it's instant speed. So I just think the card's really great. I don't know if it's like good enough to use in competitive constructive formats, but it's just itching to be brewed around, right? And it's just, I don't know, it just seems so fun. Next up, we've got Overpowering Attack. This is 2 red and 3 for a sorcery. Untap all creatures you control that attacked this turn. If it's your main phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase, followed by an additional main phase. So it's a 5 mana, give yourself a second combat phase spell, but it also has free running for 1 red and 2, and I think that's what makes it even better, right? You can swing in with all of your assassins or your commander or whatever, and your opponent doesn't know you have this card, and maybe they're in a situation where it's way more beneficial to just let the creature through because of Death Touch, or maybe it's too hard to block because of Menace or Flying, or whatever the case may be. They let your creature through, and then second main phase, you can just jam this for its free running cost and get a second attack, and then they are pooping their pants because they didn't anticipate a second combat phase and they already let some stuff through. That can be really scary. So pretty cool play lines here with the free running ability and getting a second combat phase. Just a fun card. Next up, we've got Assassin Gauntlet. I need coffee, man. If you see me wincing over here, it's because my throat is so dry. It's a lot of talking. But it's okay, we're an hour in and we're almost through it. Nectar of the Gods is important, but we don't have time for an actual coffee break. Assassin Gauntlet. 1 blue and 2 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to up to 1 target creature you control, and then tap all creatures target opponent controls. So it's a 3-mana thing, and it's going to tap down their board right when it enters, which is really awesome. It equips for 2 mana. An equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card and then discard a card. So no matter what, for your 3 mana, you tap down all of their blockers, get to swing with everything, and whatever this is attached to is swinging in for an extra 1 damage and letting you loot when it hits. So decent amount of value here. Definitely tapping everything down is really the crux of what makes this card playable, for sure. But leaving behind the ability to, you know, buff your dude and be able to loot when it hits in is decent. It's decent value. Pretty interesting way to do removal. We've seen removal done on equipment or combat tricks done on equipment in a lot of cards in this set, and I think it's an interesting way to do it, leaving behind a little bit of value, making it not just a one-hit wonder, you know? So I think it's fun. It's also very flavorful. I dig the art. But moving on, we have our last card. This is Jacob Fry. 1 black and 2 for a 3/2 legendary human assassin. It partners with Eevee Fry, which means when this creature enters the battlefield, target player may put Eevee into their hand from their library and then shuffle, which is really cool. So if you play this as your commander, you can just find your Eevee. But in a multiplayer game, you can also have another player find their Eevee, which is also kind of interesting. Whenever 1 or more assassins you control deal combat damage to a player, you exile up to 1 target assassin card or card with free running from your graveyard, and if you do, you copy it and may cast the copy. So every combat that you hit in for combat damage with an assassin, you're going to be able to recast something from your graveyard, basically. Now, technically, it's not the actual thing from your graveyard. It's a copy of it, right? And that thing is exiled for good. They do that so that you can't keep making a copy of the same thing every turn after turn, and get a bunch of the same, like whatever's your best thing in the graveyard, into play. That being said, getting the best thing back, and then the next best thing back, and then the next best thing back every time you hit for combat damage, every turn that you hit for combat damage, seems decently powerful. And it's not even Jacob Fry himself that needs to hit for damage, it's just any assassin. And we've already seen plenty of ways for your assassins to get through for combat damage pretty easily, and to get even more value off other things that trigger when they get through for combat damage. So if you use this in conjunction with them, and you start to stack up lots of different things that trigger when you get through for combat damage with assassins, it's easy to see just how much crazy value you can accumulate over the course of a game. It'll be really interesting to see how deep you can go with that in Limited, because again, I have to assume Limited is a thing at this point. I didn't think 100 cards was enough for a Limited environment, but I have to assume that's the case, because half of this set is cards that look great for Limited and useless for constructed formats that these would be legal in. So I'm going to assume there's Limited. But this guy in particular might be useful even outside of Limited. I just think he's pretty great. And that's going to do it. That's the last card. All of the Assassin's Creed spoilers have been spoiled, but that doesn't mean we're done. I got a bunch of deck techs on the way, stuff that's going to survive rotation, because standard rotation is coming super soon, and those will be interesting. But even more exciting than that, Bloomburrow spoiler season is around the corner, and it's one of the most exciting times of the year, because not only is it a new set coming, but like I said, rotation is coming. We're losing 4 sets, both Innistrad sets, the Kamigawa set, and the Streets of New Capenna set, all going to be gone. And this new set, Bloomburrow, is going to come in. So it's probably the most important spoiler season, I would say, out of the whole year, because we really have to think about how we're going to be using this new card pool, missing those 4 sets and including Bloomburrow. So if you're looking forward to Bloomburrow spoilers as much as I am, definitely subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to hit the ground running and make sure to cover those right away as soon as they drop. It's going to be a really fun time. And also, please like the video if you haven't already. It means a lot, it helps me out so much more than you could possibly imagine, and just helps this video get out to way more people than it otherwise would. So I really need your guys' help in making that happen, and to those of you that do that already, thank you so much. I mean that from the bottom of my heart, sincerely, because it just helps so much. With that being said, Assassin's Creed spoiler season is over. I hope you have fun with all the cards. Let me know in the comments if you have any crazy decks planned. And I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.